Happy Father's Day for all you fathers out here. We're going to change the first hymn in the bulletin in honor of our fathers. We will be singing number 404, Faith of Our Fathers. So right after the call to worship, we'll do that. So you might want to just make note number 404. All right. You like our mural up on the wall there. Faith will conquer fear. Daniel and the lion's den. Or as King James Version says, the den of lions. Because there's actually lions in it. So it's a den of lions. We're going to be featuring that Bible story for the next 4 weeks on Wednesdays as our Kids Cafe starts up. And I'm going to be teaching that for the kids in here. So I thought that would be nice to put that up. We've got one back just like it in the big Sunday school room too. So you might want to peek in there on the way out. It's really fixed up nicely back there. And since I was preparing for that, I thought we should talk about it here today too. It's really a good lesson in faith and integrity, really. The story of Daniel and the den of lions. So hope that strikes a chord with you all today on Father's Day. Which is one reason why I wore my safari outfit here today. I have to admit, I thought of Coral when I was putting this on, because she said the other day, "When are you getting ready for a safari?" I said, "Well, yeah, as a matter of fact." So, yeah, be very, very quiet. I'm hunting lions. Call me Elmer. It also made me think of my father for Father's Day, because guess what he used to call me?
Daniel.
Brian Kamani. So just all came together this week. I don't know. It's actually been sort of fun. And we have some fun music for you today also, which again I'm going to share for the kids on Wednesday, and I wanted to share it with all of you too. So hope you enjoy today's Father's Day service. Why don't we get started with a call to worship? If you're willing and able, please stand. We gather today to worship and pray. Help us, Lord, to pray Daniel's way. We wish to obey and not go astray. Find us pure in your sight, not lion's prey. Now turn to hymn number 404. We'll sing Faith of Our Fathers.
Yeah.
Now let's all pray together our opening prayer. Holy God, sometimes we are like Darius, wanting to be in charge, desperately trying to control everyone around us. God of freedom, forgive and transform us. Sometimes we are like the Chaldeans, jealous of those who seem more successful than we. God of grace, forgive and transform us. And we are not sure if we would be like Daniel, trusting you despite all odds, devoted to you, even in the face of death. God of salvation, transform our fears into faithfulness. Amen. All right, we're going to read the scriptural account of Daniel in the lion's den. It comes from Daniel chapter 6. So hear the word of the Lord. It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps to be over the whole kingdom, and over these 3 governors, of whom Daniel was one, that the satraps might give account to them, so that the king would suffer no loss. Then this Daniel distinguished himself above the governors and satraps, because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king gave thought to setting him over the whole realm. So the governors and satraps sought to find some charge against Daniel concerning the kingdom, but they could find no charge or fault, because he was faithful, nor was there any error or fault found in him. Then these men said, "We shall not find any charge against this Daniel, unless we find it against him concerning the law of his God." So these governors and satraps thronged before the king and said thus to him, "King Darius, live forever." All the governors of the kingdom, the administrators and satraps, the counselors and advisors, have consulted together to establish a royal statute and to make a firm decree that whoever petitions any god or man for 30 days, except you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions. Now, O king, establish the decree and sign the writing so that it cannot be changed, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which does not alter. Therefore, King Darius signed the written decree. Now, when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went home, and in his upper room, with his windows open toward Jerusalem, he knelt down on his knees 3 times that day and prayed and gave thanks before his God, as was his custom since early days. Then these men assembled and found Daniel praying and making supplication before his God. And they went before the king and spoke concerning the king's decree. "Have you not signed a decree that every man who petitions any god or man within 30 days, except you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions?" The king answered and said, "The thing is true, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which does not alter." So they answered and said before the king, "That Daniel, who is one of the captives from Judah, does not show due regard for you, O king, or for the decree that you have signed, but makes his petition 3 times a day." And the king, when he heard these words, was greatly displeased with himself, and set his heart on Daniel to deliver him. And he labored till the going down of the sun to deliver him. Then these men approached the king and said to the king, "Know, O king, that it is the law of the Medes and Persians that no decree or statute which the king establishes may be changed." So the king gave the command, and they brought Daniel and cast him into the den of lions. But the king spoke, saying to Daniel, "Your God, whom you serve continually, he will deliver you." Then a stone was brought and laid on the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring, with the signets of his Lord, that the purpose concerning Daniel might not be changed. Now the king went to his palace and spent the night fasting, and no musicians were brought before him. Also his sleep went from him. Then the king arose very early in the morning and went in haste to the den of lions. And when he came to the den, he cried out with a lamenting voice to Daniel. The king spoke, saying to Daniel, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions?" Then Daniel said to the king, "O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, so that they have not hurt me, because I was found innocent before him. And also, O king, I have done no wrong before you." Now the king was exceedingly glad for him, and commanded that they should take Daniel up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no injury whatever was found on him, because he believed in his God. And the king gave the command, and they brought those men who had accused Daniel and cast them into the den of lions, them, their children, and their wives. And the lions overpowered them and broke all their bones in pieces before they ever came to the bottom of the den. Then King Darius wrote, "To all peoples, nations, and languages that dwell on the earth, peace be multiplied to you. I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom men must tremble and fear before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God, and steadfast forever. His kingdom is the one which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall endure to the end. He delivers and rescues, and he works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth. Who has delivered Daniel from the power of the lions?" So this Daniel prospered in the reign of Darius and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Now I've got a fun song that I'm going to share with the kids on Wednesday, so I thought we're all big kids, we might as well have some fun with it too. As you can hear, see, one of the titles of it is "Here Kitty Kitty." So it's by a guy named Buddy Davis.
incline. A statue made of nations, but a dream that lost its mind. Well, I ate the root and when the lion's den, and there was no way out. Daniel didn't scream, and Daniel didn't holler, and Daniel didn't even shout. He prayed to his God, and God heard his prayer. Close the lions stopped there.
Hey, everybody.
Here, 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 here.
Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. God is so good. God is so good. God is so good. He's so good to me. Amen. Our second scripture lesson comes from the epistle of 2 Timothy, from chapter 4. It's right near the end of the letter. As you probably heard, there were other occasions and examples of Christians being thrown to the lions throughout history, as in Rome, where it was done for games in the Colosseum and circuses, at the big circus place there. And this, I believe, has a reference to that. It's Paul writing to his disciple Timothy. It's just near the end of the letter, as I said. 2 Timothy chapter 4, beginning with 16. So hear the word of the Lord. At my first defense, no one came to my support, but everyone deserted me. May it not be held against them. But the Lord stood at my side and gave me strength, so that through me the message might be fully proclaimed, and all the Gentiles might hear it. And I was delivered from the lion's mouth. The Lord will rescue me from every evil attack, and will bring me safely to his heavenly kingdom. To him be glory forever and ever. Amen. This is the word of the Lord for the people of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So Daniel in the den of lions, as we read. I read from the New King James Version, which also said den of lions. It's really, there is a difference if you think about it. Lion's den basically would just be a place where lions could be. There may or may not be lions in a lion's den, but a den of lions most certainly would have lions in it. So I might not mind going into a lion's den to see what it's like, but if it's a den of lions, that's another matter. Amen. And this has been a long time beloved Bible story that we all heard in Sunday school if we went, and which is taught and told in VBS and Bible, story studies today. I wanted to share it because I haven't heard it talked about in church really, at least not for a long time. I just basically wanted to go through it and talk about parts of it. So I hope that we find a lesson or two here. There are so many dramatic features in this story. It's one reason why it's been so popular over the years. There's political intrigue. which we certainly see these days. There's the vanity of a king and his pride and arrogance. There's the integrity of a man, which is rare these days, it seems. And the power and preservation of God. There's even wild animals and violence. So it's an exciting story. So let's take a closer look. How did Daniel find himself in a den of lions? Well, we read through it. And the first 3 verses of chapter 6 describe Daniel in the government of Darius. He was between 80 and 90 years old at this time. He'd been there most of his life and had been shown favor by God and therefore by the kings, and he had been high up in the government for years. First 3 verses basically say that it pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps, to be over the whole kingdom. A satrap was a local ruler, a judge or a magistrate that he set up over a region or a province, because this kingdom, really empire, had conquered Babylon. And it was the Persians and the Medes had come in, and Darius was now the ruler. It said over these satraps were 3 governors. Daniel was one. So he was one of the top 3, at least, in the government. The satraps might give account to them so that the king would suffer no loss. He was to manage things for the king. Then this Daniel distinguished himself above the governors and satraps because an excellent spirit was in him. Wouldn't that be nice for others to think of us as one with an excellent spirit, so that we might be put in charge of important things? And the king gave thought to setting him over the whole realm. Reminds me a lot of the story of Joseph in Genesis. Pharaoh put him in charge of everything because he had an excellent spirit. So it says Daniel distinguished himself. And Daniel was one of 3 leaders directly under Darius. And he shined above the other 2 leaders because he had an excellent spirit, it says. So Daniel apparently had a good attitude in his work and his life. And this made him, unfortunately, an object of jealousy and attack. These other government officials didn't like it. And then verses 4 through 9 reveal that a plot against Daniel comes to be. It's conceived and initiated by some of these other evil people. So the governors and satraps sought to find some charge against Daniel, it says, concerning the kingdom. But they could find no charge or fault, because he was faithful, nor was there any error or fault found in him. Then these men said, "We shall not find any charge against this Daniel unless we find it against him concerning the law of his God." They knew he was faithful about that, and that if they cooked up some law against what he's doing with his God, then maybe they could trap him there, because they could not find him doing anything wrong. So these governors and satraps thronged before the king and said to him, "King Darius, live forever." Seems like they all say that to the kings and the pharaohs and everything. Live forever. They were supposed to pretend or act like the king was God and that he might live forever, even though, of course, nobody ever did. And all the governors of the kingdom, they said, the administrators and the satraps, the counselors and advisors have consulted together to establish a royal statute. Well, first of all here, they're lying. Not all the governors, all the administrators, they didn't consult Daniel about this, obviously, and he was one of the chief ones. So they kind of went around him, came to the king and said, hey, we all got together and decided we want to make a decree that whoever petitions any god or man over 30 days, except you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions. So again, they're pointing to the king as you are our God. You're the only one who should be worshipped and honored and prayed to. So for 30 days, let's make it official and say everybody has to honor and pray to you. And just to make sure, if anybody prays to any other god, we'll throw them in the den of lions, okay? Well, the king, I guess, liked that idea, got his vanity to his pride, and so that he went ahead and signed it. It tells us that, it says, O king, establish the decree and sign the writing so that it cannot be changed, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which does not alter. It was their custom, their law, that once a decree was signed and put into place, it could not be changed. Because apparently if it was decreed and signed by the king, who was God, it could not be wrong. So it could not be changed. And Daniel was such a faithful man that those who looked for a flaw in his actions or his character kept coming up empty. As it said, they could find no charge or fault because he was faithful. But you know, sometimes today a candidate or a nominee for political office undergoes intense scrutiny, right? People start trying to find any possible thing wrong that they can blow up in the media and, discredit him or find fault, just like they were trying to do with Daniel. But imagine watching a public servant in office for over 50 years and finding nothing wrong. No fraudulent expense accounts, no intern scandals, no questionable business deals, no bribes from lobbyists, no accusations from many of his staff. Simply, there were no skeletons in Daniel's closet. And his enemies examined his life and found nothing to attack, so they had to make something up, which it seems happens far too often in our world, doesn't it? There was no error or fault found in him. Now, this was not to imply that Daniel was perfect or actually sinless. There was only one who was perfect and sinless, Jesus Christ. But this is saying that Daniel was a man of great integrity and honesty. We could also say that Daniel was especially blameless in the conduct of his professional life as a government official. And his adversaries, as we read, said, we shall not find any charge against this man unless we find it against him concerning the law of his God. See, these men knew Daniel well. They knew he could not be trapped into evil. But they also knew that he would be faithful to his God in all circumstances. I think this is a lesson for us. Every Christian should consider if others might think or say the same thing about us. Can't find anything wrong in what he does publicly, but we know he's consistent and faithful with his God. Okay? If the enemies of Daniel knew him, they also knew Darius. And they knew that they could appeal to Darius's pride by saying what they said. So they suggested to pretend that he was a god for 30 days, so that the whole empire should make prayer and supplication to him and pay him divine honors. And that was the bait. But the real object was to destroy Daniel. And they said in verses 8 and 9, Now, O king, issued the decree and put it in writing so it cannot be altered, in accordance with the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be repealed. So they put it into writing and it couldn't be changed. Charles Spurgeon said, suppose the law of the land were proclaimed, that no man shall pray during the remainder of this month, on pain of being cast into a den of lions. How many of you would then pray? I think there would be rather a scanty number at a prayer meeting, don't you? Not what the attendance at prayer meetings is scanty enough now. So he was saying, it sounds like he was a preacher and he was probably zinging them with an arrow there. You know, if we did this here and if our government said, no more praying for 30 years or you're going to be thrown in a den of lions, how many of you would pray anyway? Who would show up on Wednesday prayer meeting? That kind of thing. Probably be even less than it is now. You know, so I thought that was kind of funny. But if there were the penalty of being cast into a den of lions, he went on to say, I am afraid the prayer meeting would be postponed for a month, owing to pressing business and manifold engagements of one kind or another. So we go on to look at verses 10 through 15 that tell us Daniel's faithfulness to God caused him to be condemned here. And I'll skip over that again because we read through it, verses 10 through 15. You might want to go through this again. But see, Daniel was confronted here with a test of loyalty. He was a loyal subject of his king, yet he knew that the King of Kings deserved a higher loyalty. And so Daniel refused to give to the government the measure of obedience that he knew belonged to God alone. Others probably considered it risky for Daniel to pray, as was his custom, but Daniel knew that the safest thing he could do was to radically obey his God. You know, it isn't hard to see why most of us are people pleasers. Because it seems as if people have the power in our lives, other people, power to hire or fire us, to break our hearts, power to slander us, to make our lives generally miserable if someone's upset with us. Any given person can have some power over our lives like that. But the power to obey and please God and stand for Him comes from a settled understanding that God is the one really in control. And it says he prayed and gave thanks before his God, as was his custom since early days. So Daniel didn't let the decree change his actions one way or another. He didn't do more praying or less. He just simply continued his excellent prayer life. Really, there would have been danger in both directions if you think about it. It would have been compromise to do less praying or pride to do more. So Daniel was just being faithful in prayer to God as he always regularly did. He prayed in his upper room, it said. This was private prayer, not public so others could see, not intending to impress others. He prayed with his windows open toward Jerusalem, it said, remembering the temple place of sacrifice, even when there was no sacrifice happening. Jerusalem and the temple had been destroyed. There was no Old Testament covenant sacrifices going on at that time. But he prayed according to Scripture, as in 1 Kings chapter 8, Solomon asked God to give special notice to the prayers of his people when they prayed toward Jerusalem and the temple. So he must have known about that in Solomon. He knelt down on his knees, praying just like Jesus did, where we can read in Luke 22. We also read in Acts that Stephen, Peter, Paul, Luke, and other leaders of the church knelt and prayed in the same way. Daniel, it says, prayed 3 times that day, knowing that even though a little prayer is good, much prayer is far better, and that was his tradition, his custom. He prayed and gave thanks, because great prayer is filled with thanksgiving. And then the account continues saying that they found Daniel praying and making supplication before his God. They didn't exactly find him, they were looking for him to catch him praying. Ah, we got you. They knew they would. They found Daniel deep in prayer, as they knew they would. See, for Daniel, prayer was both communion with God and pleading for his will to be accomplished. So the bad guys went before the king, and they said, that Daniel, who was one of the captives from Judah, even though he'd been there longer than most of them had probably been alive, does not show due regard for you, O king. Now that was not true, of course. There was another lie there. Daniel intended no disrespect for the king. He was only showing a higher respect for God. And the king, when he heard these words, was greatly displeased with himself, it says, because he knew his decree could not be withdrawn, and that Daniel would have to be punished. You know, there's some things to like about King Darius here. When you look at him, one of the admirable things about him is that he was displeased with himself. He knew he'd made a mistake here. Instead of blaming others, he knew he was at fault. And, you know, like Darius, our foolish decisions can often haunt us and hurt us, can't they? Often, when something like that happens, all we can do is pray and ask God to mercifully and miraculously intervene when we make foolish decisions. And if we get what we deserve because of them, then we should take responsibility for it. You know, it brings to mind, too, the earlier story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, also in the book of Daniel, which was maybe 40, 50 years before this. They pretty much said the same thing. We won't bow and pray to you, worship you, O God. So they were getting thrown, they got thrown in the fiery furnace. They just said, our God will protect us, and even if he doesn't, we will not bow to you. Moving ahead to verse 16. So the king gave the command, and he brought Daniel and cast him into the den of lions. But the king spoke, saying to Daniel, your God, whom you serve continually, he will deliver you. So Darius had faith. He no doubt had heard about that story of the fiery furnace from years before. And it was faith born out of Daniel's trust in the Lord. He knew that Daniel would stand for this. And the idea was, he's saying, I tried my best to save you, Daniel, but I failed. Now it's up to your God. Then a stone was brought and laid on the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring, that the purpose concerning Daniel might not be changed. Now that might have been to protect Daniel as much as to make sure somebody didn't rescue Daniel. See, Darius knew that Daniel had powerful enemies who might kill him if the lions did not. So the king went to his palace and spent the night fasting. No musicians were brought before him. Also his sleep went from him. You know, Daniel must have had a better night's rest than Darius here, it seems. We can be sure that Daniel prayed in the lion's den because it was simply his habit to pray. Charles Spurgeon again said, in any case, he must have had a glorious night, what with the lions and the angels all night to keep him company. He was spending the night watches in grander style than Darius. Think about it. Yeah, spend the night with some lions and angels. I mean, that would be a good time if you ask me. But, you know, many people, when they go over this or hear about this story, have questions about how it might have actually happened, what Daniel actually saw, and how the angel shut the lions' mouths. But all those details aren't really there. All we really need to know is that Daniel was faithful, so God sent an angel to serve Daniel's need and protect him. Then the king arose very early in the morning and went in haste to the den of lions. And when he came to the den, he cried out with a lamenting voice to Daniel, hoping Daniel was still okay. The king spoke, saying, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions? And Daniel said to the king, O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, so that they have not hurt me, because I was found innocent before him. And also, O king, I have done no wrong before you. Then the king was exceedingly glad for him, and commanded that they should take Daniel up out of the den. So Daniel was taken out of the den, and no injury whatever was found on him, because he believed in his God. And it's interesting in verse 22 when Daniel says to the king, I was found innocent before him. I have done no wrong before you. See, Daniel did break the king's law, but he did not go against the king or against the king's best interests. Okay, Daniel here is an example of obedient disobedience, you could say. Yet, through it, he kept his integrity. It's a really interesting example. And Daniel's cause was righteous, and he was unjustly accused. But those things alone did not protect him before the lions. Daniel needed a living, abiding faith in God, even in the most difficult circumstances. And so, there's a teaching moment here. Amen. The power of God sent an angel to protect Daniel in response to a prayer of faith coming from a consistent, abiding walk with God that he never strayed from. And because of this faith, Daniel is recognized in Hebrews chapter 11, which is sometimes known as the Hall of Faith. It says he was one who by faith stopped the mouths of lions. So again, it's an example for us to do our best to live this way. And we then unfortunately see the fate of those who plotted against Daniel. It says the king gave the command, and they brought those men who had accused Daniel, and they cast them into the den of lions. Them, their children, and their wives, and the lions overpowered them and broke all their bones in pieces before they ever came to the bottom of the den. Now, nothing to say this is good or right at all, but it was the Persians back then, and that's what they did. It was obviously severe, but it was also according to the ancient customs among the Persians, and their way of doing things was often quite brutal. Then Darius decrees that all must honor the God of Daniel. The book of Daniel really follows a familiar pattern found in all throughout God's Word. God's people stand firm in their convictions, and when they do, God honors and protects them. And the testimony of God's work makes the ungodly around them see and tell of the greatness of God. That's how he works oftentimes. And so through the witness of Daniel, his faith, and the faithfulness and power of God, an entire nation came to know and have reverence for God. So, again, this could be an example for us, even individually. It may seem, how can we change our nation? Well, by acting this way, others who don't believe will see and recognize God. For he is the living God, and he endures forever, Darius said. His kingdom will not be destroyed. His dominion will never end. Praise God. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, we're going to end with a great song. It's a few minutes long. I hope you really like it. How about if we all stand? In fact, you want to dance out in the streets, this would be a good one. This is a gospel song.
Remember Daniel in the lion's den. Was there? He was there, for he would not bow to man. There's no doubt, but in life God shut the mouth of
kind of wish our sister Cindy had been here. She was talking about maybe starting a choir and that, and how we could do that, right? Amen. Go with the strength, faith in God of Daniel, and you will be safe and have integrity for others to see. In the name of Jesus, amen. God bless you all.